we've been talking about this massive winter storm set to hit portions of Ontario and maybe some areas of Quebec as well. Melinda, we're going to be diving into the details on that because everyone has their burning questions. When is it safe to drive? When should I be staying off the roads? When is the snow going to hit parts of the GTA? Mark, you're also joining us from this time actually indoors, which is actually quite interesting. That's great. You're staying warm. You're staying dry for now. Don't get too comfortable because you're going to be heading out in this mess. Yeah. So we're essentially doing a live
This is why I'm spending as much time inside as I can.
Yeah. Enjoy it while it lasts because I'm going to show everyone at home what this system is actually looking like on satellite imagery. It's very nasty, Mark and Melinda, down towards the southern United States. It looks like we've already had tornado watches and warnings being issued for the south. Very convective the system is. We all know the nature of these Texas lows, right? They're very dynamic. They're hitting some cold Arctic air towards the north, but they're also drawing in a ton of Gulf moisture, which makes them so interesting. Mark, have you experienced Texas lows down towards the south before? I don't think I ever asked you that question. That's interesting because I know you certainly dealt with Texas lows here in Ontario.
Oh yeah, I mean I've dealt with Texas lows on a pretty regular basis when you're in Tornado Alley. It's one of the ones that really kicks things up and really gets things going in May. And that's actually what it's doing down south right now. It's actually kicked up a bunch of very severe weather yesterday down around in Texas itself. There were a tornado, I believe, in Fort Worth. Some multiple areas down there. And this whole system, these are very classic systems. That bring tremendous amounts of snow to us. So if the center of the low goes just south of Lake Erie, that's what dumps a ton of snow on top of us because it sort of draws in that cold air, puts all that very warm, moist air, it mixes it all up and just dumps it right along the 401. And that's what this one looks really like it's doing right now.
Yeah, a lot of moisture, Melinda, with this one. We're just kind of looking at the zoomed in radar reflectivity, a lot of lightning down towards the south, some heavier pulses already pushing closer to southwestern Ontario. I did take a moment just to look at the current observations across the southwest. Temperatures, which is quite interesting, we can talk about this first before we get to viewer questions, are kind of on the mild side. I know the winds are picking up out of the east, so it's not really feeling mild. I find it quite bone chilling when I went outside this morning. We are on the west end of Lake Ontario, so that easterly wind is making it feel a lot more uncomfortable. But Mark and Melinda, these temperatures are right around that freezing mark, even above that for now, and we're expecting it to be quite wet on the roads as the system initially pushes in.
Yeah, you know, we are seeing those warmer temperatures, so that means it's going to be a bit more of a wetter snowfall as we continue in through the day today, opposed to more fluffier. So a bit more of a messier commute, a lot more slush on the roadways as well. And Jesse, looking at the forecast, we are seeing quite a bit of accumulation, potentially gearing towards 30 centimeters of snowfall right up along the GTA, especially for areas north of the 407. That's where we're seeing that little bit of a gradient there. We're looking at that higher accumulation amount.
So let's get to the first question. This is more of a bigger picture question and more of a generic. Everyone wants to know, will the snow affect the commute in the GTA today? This is an easy one. Who wants to answer this one?
I'll go.
I'll answer this one.
Yeah, okay, Mark, you go first.
Okay. I'm not too worried about the commute too much in the GTA, but if you can leave work at 3 o'clock, that'll keep it good and safe. I mean, keep in mind this whole thing is coming from the west, moving towards the east. And I've seen more than once where we start to get that snow in the west end of the GTA. Lots of people are actually now, working in the GTA, living in Kitchener-Waterloo. So you've got that trip all the way along up the escarpment near Milton. That's going to fill in first. So I would say, if you can get out early, and just let me be on the road. Don't do what Mark does, and I'll show you what it's like, what that commute's going to be like.
Yeah, and you know what? This is a great storm timeline. You could consider this your cheat sheet if you are in the greater Toronto area or maybe surrounding areas, like just north and west of the city. This is the general timeline of this Texas low, Melinda. You mentioned it's going to be a little bit wet. maybe a little bit slower to start transitioning over to snow for areas across the southwest, like
Right.
Kitchener, London, Waterloo, down towards Windsor. But through the afternoon, those easterly winds that we're discussing, those really start to pick up. And yes, it's going to be very gusty as you get closer to that rush hour time frame around 6, 7 o'clock. Friday evening and late evening, that's closer to dinner hour. That's where the heavy snowfall develops. I want to get into the snowfall rates in just a second, but notice some of these key points written here. Possible whiteouts, maybe even blizzard conditions as we push into the overnight hours. Wind speeds, wind gusts rather, will exceed 70 kilometers per hour. And it looks like there's going to be possible power outages. Mark, you have experience dealing with power outages when it comes to, say, ice storms, freezing rain. We're not expecting freezing rain out of this one, thankfully. But what can you comment on? Because this is going to be a very heavy snow. It's going to be quickly accumulating, plus the winds. So what does that mean in terms of power outages?
Well, you know what? Power outages are always an issue, and it's always something that's a little hard to nail down because it really depends on where, how strong the winds are, how much accumulation you're dealing with. Freezing rain is the one that really does it because you get all that accumulation of ice, that accretion of ice on power lines, on power poles, on branches, and they come down. This time of year, we're a little bit lucky in that there's no leaves on the trees. So, the wind and the snow can go right through there, right through the trees rather than sort of, all that force when you have lots and lots of leaves. That's why we often see trees coming down in the summer thunderstorms and even in the fall snowstorms. Right now, it's really going to be how much snow is going to accumulate on the branches, and those trees then coming down on top of power lines. Because this is a fairly sticky snow, so because it's close to 0 degrees, I am expecting a bit more accumulation on the trees than, say, we would expect if it was -10. At that point, it's just sort of moving right through and we get those whiteout conditions. But given the snowfall rates, at the height of the storm, that 7 to 9 to 10, to midnight time period, especially, in that Milton region, that's where I'm getting a little bit concerned about the power outages for there, because you could have those branches coming down because of the strong winds and that little bit of accumulation of snow on those branches. It's also the potential for some whiteouts, so I would not be surprised to see road closures as well.
And I did mention the snowfall rates. Let's get to that because that's what makes this system very unique, actually, because we did have a snowstorm earlier on in the work week that brought heavy snow, but not at this rate, which is actually quite interesting. Melinda, let's actually pair the progression of this system with the precipitation amounts that are coming through with the snowfall rates, because as you can fast forward into around that 7 o'clock hour, hopefully everyone can already be home by this time. Things become a bit more dicey on the road. So let's talk about the snowfall rates as I play this through.
Yeah, so around that 6, 7 o'clock hour, it starts that light snowfall pushing across the GTA, continuing around that dinner hour, 8, 9. This map here, it's showing you those snowfall rates, potentially 4 to 5 centimeters per hour, and it continues to be a bit more intense as we head towards 9, 10 o'clock. Some areas, this is one model just showing how intense those snowfall rates could be. We could be ending up seeing 7 to 8 centimeters an hour in some localities across the GTA. As we continue just after the midnight hour, we're still going to be seeing quite a bit of snowfall. Still those rates upwards to 4 centimeters per hour, and then starting to see that snow taper off slowly by 7 a.m. Saturday, and then behind that, looking at just some light flurries throughout the early day Saturday into the afternoon before that storm clears out right across the GTA.
And Mark, I'm pretty sure you witnessed thunder snow before, or at least captured on camera, which is very tough to do. I'm thinking there's going to be some bolts out there with this because it's so convective.
Right.
You had to look at those snowfall rates. What are your hopes and what are your dreams when it comes to the thunder snow tonight?
I love that. Yeah, my hopes and dreams are definitely that we will see some thunderstorms. And I wouldn't actually be surprised. What was interesting is Dave Sills, sort of Ontario, Canada's premier tornado researcher, he and I were having a discussion about why we saw so much thunder snow with the snow squalls, and why it was very, it was very localized. It was like right here and right here. Why was it, why were it in those specific areas? Well, as it turns out, the thunder snow may correlate quite closely to the wind farms. So those wind turbines are actually kicking off a bit of lightning. So if you're in those areas, and I'm trying to think of exactly where there's a bunch of wind turbines that are where we're going to see it come through, probably closer down to Long Point and sort of a little further down, closer to Lake Erie. Those are the areas we're probably going to see it, or at least get kicked off around those wind turbines. Now, having said that, I wouldn't be surprised if we see it just with the bands that are going to be coming off of Lake Ontario, through Hamilton and maybe even, as far north as Clappers's Corners, sort of that whole Milton region and just along the escarpment, maybe where we really see that those lightning bolts. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for. So fingers crossed.
Okay, I know I'll be watching the radar through the late evening hours. You'll be out there, Mark, hopefully, staying safe, because it's going to be very tricky. And we have a lot of questions coming through in terms of travel conditions, right? So we already know it's going to be impacting the evening drive home, or at least through the late evening and early overnight hours, Melinda. But there's some other viewers that have questions, not in Toronto, but outside of the city. Okay. Kitchener in particular. They want to do some traveling early Saturday morning, just outside. This is 30 minutes south of Kitchener towards Ayr. Melinda, let's walk this viewer through what to expect, because yes, it's going to be nasty. You want to stay off the roads this evening and overnight. You could see the snow pushing in. Yep. And you mentioned this is the darker hues of blue coming in. Those are the heaviest snowfall bands coming through around 10, 11 p.m., continues through the overnight. Melinda, but what happens as we get closer to Saturday morning?
We'll still see a little bit of light snow depending on what time you are heading out, but it's safe to say after around that 8 o'clock hour, more so light snow, looking at some flurries. But the thing is, it's going to be a lot of snowfall, especially for the crews to help plow the roadways. The major roadways and the highways will most likely be somewhat plowed, but we have to worry about those inner side streets. Those are the ones that take quite a longer time to get plowed, especially if the major focus towards the overnight is going to be on those highways and in towards the more common streets.
Mm-hmm. And we also have to address the term blizzard, because if you did have a moment to check your local forecast, living in parts of Southern Ontario through the Golden Horseshoe especially, you're under not a winter storm warning only, but there's that possibility of blizzard warnings being issued. We actually have blizzard in our local forecast, depending on where you live. I know Oakville has it, parts of Toronto have blizzard in their icons, Brampton as well, parts of Hamilton. So what exactly is a blizzard? We have this notion of it being very nasty on the roads, and yes, it certainly is, but there's a exact criteria when it comes to really determining whether or not it is blizzard or blizzard-like conditions. So we need a couple of things on the table here, Melinda. Sustained winds, 40 kilometers per hour or greater, visibility down to 400 meters or less. It could be whiteouts through blizzards, of course, and these conditions have to last for at least 4 hours or longer. It looks like we're going to be seeing blizzard conditions.
We are, because it's already starting to be a bit more gusty outside currently, not as strong as what we're going to be expecting towards the overnight, Jesse, but those winds are already starting to pick up, and that's going to intensify towards the overnight hours, especially when we're going to be seeing that heaviest snowfall rates falling after that 8 o'clock towards the midnight hour. And throughout our Saturday, it is going to be a bit more gusty as well, not as strong. We are forecasting upwards to, I believe, 80 kilometers per hour winds throughout the overnight hours. And then we'll be seeing a bit more stronger winds towards the morning, and then easing roughly 40 to 50 kilometers per hour. It's still going to be a bit more chillier because we are feeling it off the wind, off the lake, in fact, so we are going to be feeling a bit more of a wind chill. But here we go. Here's those winds pushing in. So throughout the evening hours, gusts upwards to 70. It does climb a bit higher in some localities, upwards to 80. And then as we head into the morning hours, we'll start to see that slowly diminish. But this time it is coming out from the northwest. So we are going to be looking at more of that cooler air filtering in and right in behind it.
Mm-hmm. I want to get to another question. This is very interesting because a lot of people don't have the luxury of working from home or escaping the office early. because of essential work and it needs to get done. So what if you have no choice but to be on the roads tonight? You need to get somewhere, you need to get home, you need to get to work maybe. Any tips? And we do have some tips from our very own Kim McDonald. We're going to be diving into that, or Victoria rather. Kim will be joining the program a little bit later, but let's get to some driving safety tips through winter.
This is where you want to get off the road as quickly and safely as possible. If you can't see, you can't drive.
With any winter storm, it's always best to
avoid unnecessary travel if you can.
If you don't have to go out, you don't go out.
We do suggest not driving if you don't have to.
But what do you do if you get caught driving through a blizzard?
Totally relying on a GPS is dangerous. You miss that turn, you didn't realize you're supposed to go there, you crank on the wheel and suddenly you're sliding into a pole or into another car, or worse, a vulnerable road user like a pedestrian. We prefer you don't use your hazards unless you are stuck. When you have your full headlight system on, we already see you. The flashing lights actually tell drivers that you're a stopped, disabled vehicle, and it confuses people, so they don't know how to handle it. But if you do find yourself in a situation where you become involved in a collision, if your vehicle is stuck, call police and get the appropriate help. Take direction from dispatch. They're going to tell you what to do next.
Delays are bound to happen during a winter storm, so be sure to pack your patience.
You've made the decision to drive even though the weather conditions are suggesting you shouldn't have, and now you're stuck, and you are stuck.
It's literally at a standstill.
Please wait. Don't drive on shoulders, don't drive on grass, don't drive the wrong way, because not only could you find yourself being charged by police for doing something dangerous, but you might actually get hurt or hurt somebody else.
I want to go through a list of road closures that we're dealing with right now across the
Instead
province.
of being stressed out about the drive, find a way to make it positive. You know, I like listening to podcasts or the radio and make it just an anticipated way of playing.
Podcasts, great idea. Because you need to pack your patience, right, on the roads. I know if you don't have the choice of not being on the roads, and you have to be there and you have to get somewhere, packing your patience is definitely the name of the game here. Mark, we have a wide array of weather alerts issued by Environment Canada. The big question, the burning question is, do you think blizzard warnings are going to be popping up through the later half of today?
Oh man, you're going to put me on the spot like that. Wow, that is you know what? That's a tough call, but I wouldn't be surprised. I think it's going to be fairly localized, probably to those areas where we're getting the winds off Lake Ontario, sort of that western end of Lake Ontario, Burlington over to Milton, maybe in those areas. But the other areas that potentially may get it as well, and there's you have to sort of have a balance here of being further north and not getting quite as much snow, but having the temperatures just that touch colder so that you do run out of visibility. It's those rural areas north of Kitchener or over towards Georgetown, just outside of the GTA and sort of to that northwest. That's where quite often we see road closures when we get systems like this, and it's those north-south roads that are going to be the worst because you're getting those winds from the east right across, and what'll happen is as you're driving north, you'll have the snow going this way across in front of you, and it'll also be building drifts out over top of the road at the same time, which is why we quite often, I always say, if the road is closed, if there's a road closed sign there, even if there's no OPP officer sitting there, please don't go past those road closed ones because one, you can't get down those roads. You really can't. And two, getting a tow truck in there or getting OPP to you is going to be difficult. It's going to be very, very difficult. So you could be trapped out there for hours. And the worst thing you could do at that point is get out of your car and try to walk out in the middle of whiteout conditions. So yeah, I'm just saying, if you don't have to be out on the roads and if just don't cross those road closure signs, I'll be out and about to sort of show what kind of conditions what it's like. I've done this a few times, so I have some idea of what I'm doing. So that's the old saying of don't do what Mark does.
Okay, let's get to our next question. I live in Dundas. Any ideas specifically about what we'll get hit with? Because there is that potential of some mixing and some difficult forecast forecasting in this area, trying to decide whether to cancel plans. Thanks. Okay, let's start off with the time frame. We kind of know things become very dicey a little bit later this evening. Dundas is one of those tricky areas. Mark, I don't know if you want to comment on this because you're familiar with the Hamilton area. It is very localized, even through the city of Hamilton, for instance.
Yep.
Snowfall amounts can really change. Winds can really play a part in that as well. In our actual forecast, I'm showing the overall map of our forecast. Hamilton, the Dundas area, is in that 20 to 30 range. But what are your thoughts? Because this kind of goes into our next question that we're going to be answering in terms of the mixing potential. Do you think that being a little bit closer to Lake Ontario or any lakeshore is going to be impacting this forecast of 20 to 30 centimeters? Again, that's a range that we're forecasting.
Yeah, I mean, we have to give that range because this has been a notoriously difficult one to forecast for. But I'm just saying, if you're in Dundas, and I do know Dundas has got a lot of up and down. So going up some of the roads that lead up the escarpment, don't even bother. I mean, just forget it. Even Highway 6, which is sort of the main one which leads between Hamilton and the 401, it's a very popular road. That is going to be, that big initial hill that everybody sort of knows, that's going to be, hopefully, you know, the plows will be going up and down, but it's still, if we get those very high snowfall rates, that's going to be almost impossible to get down. Or actually, it'd be very easy to get down, very hard to get up. And that's what we sort of want to avoid. So if your plans aren't absolutely critical, I would say, you know what, wait till tomorrow. The big issue that we saw, that I remember, was the Christmas storm when I was in Fort Erie. That Fort Erie storm, we said, people, you know, don't go out unless you absolutely have to. We knew people were going to, and they did. The one thing, though, that I think we as Canadians really handled was that we were prepared for it. So we had stuff like all my gear. I've got all my winter gear here. I brought in my shovel. This is all stuff I put in my car. So there's my little shovel. I actually used that to dig out a whole bunch of people. And then also, one thing that quite often became very, very useful is this 2x6. Just put that under the drive wheel, and the cars can sort of get a little bit of traction on that and be able to back out or go forward. Super useful little thing, and again, I use that a lot in Fort Erie. I don't want to have to dig anybody out, so if you can, you know, stay home if you're not comfortable being out in the elements, please stay home. You know, I did a full workout this morning, so my arms are kind of sore, so I won't be able to dig you out easily.
I didn't know arms can look sore, but there you go. Let's get to the next question, Melinda. This has to do a lot with the temperature forecast. Let's get into this one.
Yes, so the question asks, will people close to the lake see more or less than what's predicted? So let's pull up the overall forecast for the GTA. We are looking at more of that colder air filtering in. We're not really seeing a bit of mixing along the shores of Lake Ontario. It's mainly going to be along the shores of Lake Erie. So areas like Windsor down in the southwest are seeing more so of that warmer side of the system, but we are looking at more of that colder air filtering in right across areas along the shores of Lake Ontario. So primarily we are going to be looking at snowfall, and it all depends on the winds exactly. Here's a look here at areas like St. Catharines down in through Grimsby into Hamilton. Right there is the edge of that warm air. So we could be looking at a bit of mixing for those areas, specifically along the QEW. But as you head north into more so the Oakville region, Pickering, Oshawa, those areas are dealing with a bit more of that colder air filtering in, and those winds coming up from the northwest as well. That's going to be helping to fuel a lot of that colder air pushing in, giving way to a bit more of that snowfall, Jesse.
And next question, again, probably a lot of people have this question. Will the storm hit Toronto's downtown core? I'm very worried about it. And you know, timing is key, especially when you're dealing with the commute in a major, densely populated city center where there's going to be a lot of streetcars, there's going to be taxis, there's going to be a whole lot of people commuting in and out of the city. And, you know, obviously it's Friday night, people want to have their plans. But you know what? It's not a great idea to be outdoors. This is a great graphic that illustrates the wind gusts paired with the heaviest snowfall. So any of those wind barbs you're seeing, or bar graphs rather, all the way up into very heavy to heavy snowfall. That's going to be falling between the 7 p.m. mark all the way into the pre-dawn hours on Saturday. So I'd say cancel those plans. If you don't need to be outdoors, don't, because yes, that is for the downtown core of Toronto. You're going to be seeing the worst of the conditions a little bit closer to midnight or shortly before that. Again,
you know, Jesse, one of the other things I was going to just point out when we were talking about urban areas, quite often I talk about the rural areas, but you've got to, remember that the big buildings, especially in the downtown core, can funnel out those winds right down, so you can get a little bit stronger winds. So if you're talking about something like Bloor Street or Dundas, something like that down in the core itself, you can get very strong winds, roaring down those urban canyons. And of course, you're going to be, getting it right in the face. There's going to be snow, almost causing whiteout conditions in the downtown core. The one advantage that we do have when we're talking about the city is quite walkable. TTC is underground for the most part. If you're taking the subways, if you have to take a bus, that's going to be a little trickier. If you have to take, say, the streetcars along St. Clair, that's maybe going to be a bit of a problem. TTC is going to work as hard as they can to keep everything clear, but we may have delays on that. So if you do, have to go somewhere in the core, I would say take public transit this time. But having said that, I have seen more than a few TTC buses stuck on some of those hills. Davenport, that whole stretch right along Davenport comes to mind as well. They're trying to get up some of the hills there, and it becomes just a nightmare.
Taking everyone through the overall look of the system, where it currently stands, it's still across the extreme southwest. A lot of this that you're seeing pop up on radar is not actually hitting the ground. We're still looking at some observations on the ground, some stations not really reporting the rain or the snow yet. Temperatures around 1 to 2 degrees down towards the southwest. So it's really interesting, but you can see the cloud cover. It's already spilling in across much of Ontario. I want to get to the next question, which also has to do with some traveling plans, but not through vehicles. This is for air travel, actually. Will airlines give advance notice for flight cancellations or flights scheduled to leave Saturday morning? Mainly Billy Bishop Airport is what this viewer really wants to know. This is very interesting because I did some traveling last week and we had multiple storms. We had a lot of freezing rain. Luckily, I was able to dodge a lot of that, but there were a lot of delays throughout that freezing rain event. We had that ice storm not too long ago. So what are your thoughts on this? Because the latest that I know of is there's no actual delays or cancellations as of yet.
The biggest issue and I've flown a lot, and I've flown in some nasty situations. The biggest issue that I see for this kind of thing is the backlog. They're going to try and get as many planes in and out sort of before the storm. They may shut things down during the storm, but flights were scheduled for that time period. When the snow stops, the runways are cleared off, the planes are ready to go again. You've got that backlog. I'm not an expert in airport operations, so the best thing you can do is check with your airlines, check with the airport. They're usually quite good about providing as much public information as they can with these sort of things. But I really think that, I think you're going to see some some big delays, maybe some cancellations. But how big those are, again, check with Billy Bishop or Pearson, depending on where you're going out of. But be prepared for a change in flight plans, whether you're delayed or canceled. That's the best way to deal with it. Better to be prepared and not need it than not be prepared and need it.
Absolutely. Another travel question. Let's go down towards a little bit further away from the city itself, because we have a lot of viewers across Ontario. Melinda, I live in St. Mary's. Should I be out traveling around 6 or 7 p.m. today?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is if you don't have to travel, just don't. Stay home, stay safe. Let's run out the timing wise. Around that 5-6 o'clock hour, we'll start to that lighter snow push in. So we're looking at more light snow if you do have to travel around that hour. But after 8, 9 o'clock, that's when things get quite tricky, especially across the St. Mary's area and surrounding areas. But as we continue in through the overnight, we'll start to see that snow lift off, and then by early Saturday morning, we're mostly going to be looking at some light flurries, a bit more of that wind chill as well. So cooler air moving in behind it, but around that 6, 7 hour, the storm is going to start pushing in, especially for St. Mary's, and then behind it as we continue towards the later dinner hour, that's when we'll start to see a bit more of that heavier snowfall rates and those stronger winds. But in the forecast, we have around a 15 to 25 centimeter mark for St. Mary's and the surrounding areas as well.
Again, widespread alerts in place. If you're just joining us, we're answering all of your questions live, all pertaining to this Texas low. It's impacting millions of Canadians and south of the border as well, down towards the United States, in the form of severe weather. Mark, we've been talking a lot about, all of the impacts with this. Someone else also asked on YouTube, what is the power outage risk for Toronto? It's a city that normally doesn't deal with widespread, prolonged power outages, I'd say. Like, we're pretty good when it comes to that. We're really well equipped. But what are your thoughts there? Because, Toronto is kind of in that bullseye of the very heavy snow, the very intense winds as well through the overnight. And I know no one really wants to get stuck in the dark.
Yeah, the big issue with Toronto, and sort of there's a good and bad to this, is that Toronto has a very interconnected grid. So if you have power outages in one area, you can actually reroute power from different spots to repower that area. But because the grid is so spread out, so I'm not even saying there's just so much grid there. Power outages are somewhat more likely just because there's more grid to break than, say, out in, more rural areas. But at the same time, they can reroute it. So I expect that we might see some power outages, but they might not be for too long. We're not talking about an ice storm that brings down some of the main transmission lines, the trunk feeder lines. We're just not likely to see that. But I would not be surprised to see numerous power outages. But again, they may come back on fairly quickly. Keep in mind as well, Toronto is one of the most treed cities in the world. Like, we have a lot of trees in the GTA. That's what I loved about living in Toronto. But that, of course, lends another problem. Branches coming down on wires, trees coming down. That does happen in some of the more mature treed areas. I'm thinking sort of the Royal York area, parts of older Etobicoke, parts of older Scarborough, those areas where you have a lot of trees, but they're older, that could be a problem.
And you know what? What's also another problem is if you don't have a snowblower in some of these events with dumping a dumping of 20, 30 centimeters of really heavy snow. No one really wants to do that shoveling, especially in the early morning hours. So we're going to give you some snowblower tips. Have a look.
If shoveling's not your thing, winter might seem overwhelming, especially after big snow dumps. Snowblowers can help lighten the load, but with so many options, how do you know which one to choose? You can get single stage or dual stage. Which one depends on the surface of your driveway. Is it gravel or a hard surface?
The single stage uses a rubber paddle that makes direct contact with the surface. So if you have gravel, it's going to be spitting rocks.
That rubber paddle works great on solid pavement because it cleans right down to the surface. If you do have rocks, dual stage is your best bet.
Two-stage blower has skid shoes on it and allows you to raise the snow blower off of the level. So if you have a gravel driveway, you're not necessarily spitting rocks. You can set it up an inch and a half off the surface.
You can get smaller corded electric snowblowers, mostly designed for walkways and patios, but there are now bigger snowblowers powered by lithium-ion batteries.
Now you're not dealing with gas, don't have to worry about tune-ups, don't have to worry about the price of gasoline. You just plug and charge, and when you're out in the snowstorm, away you go.
There's also a lot less noise and fumes with an electric blower. So when exactly should you blow the snow? If there's going to be a changeover to rain, get out there before that happens.
They will perform, but it's going to blow powder snow better than it will slush.
Keep an eye on the forecast so you know exactly when that changeover occurs.
Okay, knowing when that changeover occurs, that is key. Luckily, this is going to be more of a snowfall event that we're tracking. We're tracking the Texas low, by the way. Ottawa, we have a question coming from there. And you know, Ottawa is no stranger to heavy amounts of snow. But with this one, Melinda and Mark, you know, the track of this system, it's not quite plowing through the city of Ottawa. Rather, we're getting like the outer skirts of the snow. So this question reads, will there be significant snow in eastern Ontario near Ottawa? Should you avoid traveling here Saturday morning? And again, this timing, Melinda, is very different than the GTA because it does take its time to really push into eastern Ontario. So let's time this one out for anyone living in eastern Ontario or maybe doing some traveling out towards there. When can we really expect the worst of this snow?
So the snow across eastern Ontario is going to be arriving a bit more later than areas like the GTA. So this is going to be arriving after midnight. It is not, we're not going to be seeing quite intense snowfall rates in the city of Ottawa itself and surrounding areas. But as we continue into the morning, we are going to continue to see that light snowfall progress. So it might be a bit more of a trickier morning travel commute for you if you are heading out towards the morning hours and into the afternoon. And then we'll start to see it ease as we continue in through the evening. So it's a bit of a different story than what we're forecasting for areas across the GTA and southwestern Ontario. But as you can see here as well, we're not getting that 20 to 30, we're getting around that 5 to 15 for areas across Montreal, especially down and through Gatineau, Ottawa, and pushing in along areas of eastern Ontario as well. But you can see that tight gradient there pushing off from like areas like Cornwall. They're on the cusp of seeing potentially 10, or they could be seeing potentially 20. So right on the line there, the storm kind of, like you mentioned, Jesse, it pushes off east instead of tracking right in through up along the St. Lawrence as well. So here's a look at Quebec. So areas like Montreal, 10 to 15 centimeters, and up along the St. Lawrence, we'll see a little bit less like Quebec City and Trois-Rivières as well, around that 5 centimeter range.
And you know, heading out the door Saturday, depending on where you are, this system really clears out and you have a little bit of that warmer air with that Texas low. It's drawing in a little bit of Gulf moisture, a little bit of Gulf warmth. 7 degrees in Windsor. Wow, what a day. It's going to be great actually Saturday afternoon, a mix of sun and cloud. It's a great day to dig out your cars, dig out whatever is left outside. But you'll notice there's still some light snow, some flurries, maybe some blowing snow in the forecast for you in areas along the Golden Horseshoe. And then, of course, towards Montreal, you're still dealing with that snowfall. We have another question coming through. And of course, I want to invite everyone to send over their questions if you have some, because this is a far-reaching system, Mark. And this one comes out of Markham. How is Markham looking? How many centimeters? I don't know, Mark, if you want to talk about how finicky the system has been. I know some of the weather enthusiasts online and meteorologists and forecasters have been going back and forth with the snowfall maps. I mean, things really change in the course of a few days.
Yeah, this one's been notoriously difficult to forecast for. And a lot of my storm chasing friends, they're all like, oh, you know, like, this one's going to be 20. No, it's going to be 10. No, it's going to be 5. So this one's sort of been all over the place. And Southern Ontario is one of those extremely tricky areas to forecast for, partly because where the snow line, where that freezing line sits, is all important. And if it sits just south of the GTA, then that means that the GTA gets 20 centimeters. And these are just numbers I'm using as examples, not as, don't take my word for it on these ones. But if that freeze line is a little bit north, you're going to get into 5 centimeters. And that's going to make the difference for millions of people. So it makes it very, very difficult because, you add in the lakes at the same time. And now you've got that a little bit extra warmth, maybe a little bit extra moisture, so a little bit extra snow. So this makes it so difficult, especially with these Texas lows. Again, as I said, it really depends on where that freeze line is going to sit. And a lot of our models have been disagreeing with each other. One says, and one run in the morning, it says, oh, the freeze line's going to be here. And then that same model in the afternoon says it's going to be down here. And then in the evening, it says it's going to be up here. And this is what's been going on. So this is why we've had to give a little bit more of a larger error bar on this storm as compared to some of our other ones.
And you know what? If you ask me, some of the trickiest areas to forecast for, especially when you're dealing with that mixing and that transition zone, are areas along lakeshores. And in this case, Melinda, along Lake Erie, because if you look at the overall snowfall forecast that we have here, the biggest gradients are actually across the southwest. And the biggest change in the forecast, for at least that I notice, is down towards southwestern Ontario, Windsor, Chatham, London, along the shores of Lake Huron as well, where we have that gradient. And I mean, this is so tricky because viewers are asking questions, you know, exact locations and exact snowfall amounts. It's, you know, normally not really the burning question or the most important question to answer of how much snow you're going to get. It's really the highest impacts. When am I going to be seeing this heavy snow? But this brings us to the next question, because we have a viewer asking, what is the Chatham-Kent area looking like? And this is on one of those transition zones, so it's so tricky because this is one area that actually might see a lot of mixing, right?
Agreed with that, Jesse. This model here, this is the one that we're going with, and it shows that rainfall pushing in first. This is around that 3-4 o'clock hour, and then you can see that colder air filtering in towards London, and it potentially does make its way down towards that Chatham-Kent area, and then towards the afternoons, the evening hours, those pinks, that's indicating a bit of mixing there. Still, that's freezing rain, and then around that midnight hour, then we see that full transition over to that snowfall, Jesse. So it is a bit more of a trickier forecast right now in terms of snowfall totals. We're in around that 5 to around, say, 15 centimeter mark there around the southwestern portions of the province, but it is right on that cusp of that mixing line. So depending on how earlier that colder air filters in or how far north that warm air pushes in across the area.
And even some areas seeing a trace to less than 5 centimeters out of this one. So it really depends on that changeover, depends on exactly where you're located. Mark, I know this is like the bane of your existence of like forecasting exact snowfall amounts, right?
Yeah, just a little bit. One of the things, though, I want to point out, you know, we often talk about the GTA, and you know, I was talking about it earlier, saying if you can take public transit, you know, that's probably your best bet, especially if it's the subway, you're underground. On the Bloor line, you're probably better, say, than the University line, because the University line does come out, you know, up on top for a bit. When we talk about areas like Chatham, those are very rural areas. A lot of farmers in those areas, and especially this time of year, sometimes those farmers have to get to fields. They have to get things done, so they have to drive out there. And so we're trying to give them, as you know, the best idea of where that snow is going to fall and how much is going to hit the ground. And they may have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and do something. They may have to drive somewhere. So we just want to make sure that we get as much information as fast as possible. And you know, we've been working on this one like crazy for the last like few days, and this one has been very tricky. And I think we're getting a little bit more nailed down. And like I'm even learning what the forecast is from YouTube right now. So I'm really appreciating all the information.
And a great way to look at the forecast and, you know, really be aware of what to expect are the Environment Canada alerts, which are all in place and they're very widespread. Let's get to our next question. We're getting a lot through YouTube, which thank you so much for sending those in to us. Will southwestern Ontario be getting this blizzard? Woodstock, Tillsonburg areas? Question mark. This raises a concern back. It kind of circles back to our whole theory of whether or not blizzard warnings will be issued. I mean, I do want to bring this up because this is a very interesting talking point. Even though it doesn't meet the exact criteria of a blizzard, the impacts are certainly going to be there. So whether or not we hit that criteria or that warning level, it's still going to be nasty. You still want to stay home. You want to stay off the roads. But I guess here is more so the take home. How bad is it going to be across the Southwest?
One of the things that I've actually done is travel down through Woodstock so many times. Like I know that area well. One of the problems for that is it's a rural area, a lot of farm fields on there. So as soon as you get those winds coming right across the 401, you can get into whiteout conditions very, very quickly. And keep in mind that the 401, that area, the 401, is one of Canada's it is the busiest highway in Canada. It's also a major economic lifeline between the United States and Canada. So there's a tremendous amount of trade that comes down that road, which means that there's going to be a tremendous amount of 18-wheelers on the road there, and sometimes they have to get through. That's going to be the big issue for me is how much whiteouts we're going to get. And if you do have a crash in those kind of conditions, it can shut the 401 down for a very long period of time. Even though we're not, say, getting the definition of a blizzard, you still only need just a little bit of whiteouts to lose control or have a major problem. And I don't want to see anything like that. So again, we may not see the exact criteria, but we still may see those whiteouts and very poor driving conditions.
Especially with those heavy snowfall amounts coming down with the easterly winds, it's a recipe for disaster. And if you are wondering what really contributes to an actual blizzard, these are the actual criteria there. 444, 40 kilometers per hour or greater, 400 meters or less in visibility, and it has to last for 4 hours or more. But of course, it really only takes one instant on the road to create really a mess. Speaking of which, I actually want to give everyone some driving tips because I think we all need that, especially for those who are a little bit younger.
We live here, we expect it to be winter. It shouldn't be a surprise or something that you need to prepare for in Canada.
Despite our annual dose of harsh winter conditions, many drivers aren't prepared for winter driving. So, the Young Drivers of Canada releases a top 10 list of tips for anyone caught by the cold season.
A lot of it is common sense, but they do say common sense isn't so common sensible anymore.
Planning ahead is one of the most vital things you can do during the winter season.
It's more of a mindset than anything else, right? Providing yourself with that little bit of extra time in the morning to do some of the extra things that you might need to do.
Young Drivers of Canada recommends having proper winter tires, ensuring your car is cleared of snow, and leaving extra space between your vehicle and the one in front of you.
Your space is like a buffer zone around your car for when something goes wrong. You have no idea what the experience level is of the driver that's behind the wheel. They may be going very, very slow because this is their first time driving in a snowstorm.
Most importantly, always check the road conditions and weather forecast before you head out.
Pack your patience. When the weather is bad, have a preparation routine and stick to it no matter what the temperature is at that particular time.
Yeah, one of the things that I've often encountered is very, very bad driving conditions. And all of Kim's points, absolutely fantastic. But if you are out on the road, one of the most important things, and I see this all the time, is that if you get into heavy snow, people immediately brake and stop, and then that's it, you're done. If you can safely, if you can see, safety on the other side of maybe where the snow is, maybe there's a bit of a drift, don't stop. Make sure that you just keep going. It's also a really good tip for when you're being pushed out of the snow. I've pushed more people out of the snow, and I always say, look, I'm going to push you out. Do not stop. Just get going. Don't stop to say thank you to me. Just go. And that's what one of the more important things. The other thing you want to do when you're driving is look to where you want to go. Don't be focusing just on the end of your hood. You want to focus upstream. You want to make sure, okay, if I'm going to be going, in straight, I'm going to, look in that direction. If I'm going to be turning right, I'm going to be taking a look in that direction, because when you're steering a car, you tend to follow where your eyes are looking. So if you're looking off this way, you'll find yourself sort of turning a little bit off to the left or off to the right. So this is why focus ahead of yourself, be prepared for that snow, and if you do get into a little bit of snow, the car starts slipping a little bit, don't stop. Just try and make sure accelerate slowly. And one last thing is never yank your wheel like this. Just very slow, smooth corrections to your steering, because if you yank your wheel, you're done. The car's going to spin out. You're going to have some real problems. So it's always just keep calm, smooth acceleration, smooth turning, very gentle, very slow, rather than fast, hard acceleration and jerking the wheel. Don't do that because you will likely end up in the ditch.
Yeah, we don't want that. A look at the satellite and imagery, the radar as well, lots of lightning activity with this. We've been tracking this Texas low for everyone at home with all their questions as well, answering your questions. No matter where you live, odds are in Southern Ontario, this one is going to be impacting you later this evening and through the overnight. A little bit closer to home here, stretching into the southwestern sections of Ontario. It's still not quite reaching the ground, but it's popping up, and yes, the cloud cover has been spilling in across Ontario. A look at your temperatures, because we've been talking about how mild it is. It certainly doesn't feel mild, Melinda, out there.
Not, yeah.
0 degrees plus 1 degrees. It doesn't feel that warm because of the easterly winds. The winds are slowly and surely picking up. And again, anyone who lives on the west end of Lake Ontario knows what a raw easterly wind does to your conditions. Doesn't feel very nice. And later tonight is not going to be very nice. We have widespread alerts issued by Environment Canada. Odds are you're under one of these winter-like alerts. And it's not going to be a great drive, which is why a lot of people have their questions for us to answer. This one comes from someone from YouTube. Wolf A, do you think this storm can overachieve in terms of snowfall amounts in the GTA? And what they're kind of alluding to is do you think whatever I see in my snowfall forecast can be higher than what I see? What do you think, Melinda?
Yeah, we have a range in our forecast. The highest amount's 20 to 30. Yes, we could be seeing a little bit more of that increase over that 30 mark threshold, but it all depends on the winds. That's going to be one of the main factors. So generally from our forecast, we're in that 20 to 30 range. And this one is going to be hard to measure as well because we are going to be seeing the winds blowing. We're going to be looking at snow drifts as well. Winds are going to be gusting upwards to 80 kilometers per hour. Whiteout conditions are possible. These are one of my favorite graphics. In fact, it shows you how heavy or how intense the snowfall is going to be combined with those wind gust numbers. City of Toronto will be gusting upwards to 75, potentially 80 kilometers per hour. And at the same time, we'll be seeing the most heaviest snowfall rates, potentially over 4 to 5 centimeters an hour. So we do have the potential to overachieve, but it's not as great as with other storms.
It's great that you mentioned that it's going to be so difficult to measure this snow. And I don't think the general public really understands the difference or can even notice the difference between 20 or 30 centimeters.
Right.
I think at some point, I don't know what that point is, that magic number, it's you know what, we just got a lot of snow out of this. And yes, it's already impacted millions of people at that point. Mark, what do you think? Because I know you went, what rings a bell to me at least, what is most memorable is the storm that you tracked down towards the Niagara-Buffalo region. I think it was closer to Christmas, and you were trying to get a measurement because that was an epic snowfall event, and it was literally immeasurable.
Yeah, I'm going to say which one. There's been a few down in that area that I've actually done this year. I mean, we may have had a fairly mild winter, but I have been in some of the most crazy snowfalls I think I've ever been in. But yeah, when you're measuring snow, we have to measure it in an area that has no winds because you get a little bit of wind in there and you get it drifting. So some areas may see far more and some areas may see far less, but that's not because they're getting more snow and they're getting less snow. It's just because that wind is literally picking up that snow and depositing it somewhere else. So when I measure snow, I say this is a deeply unscientific look at the snowfall, but here's how much we have right now. Because I can't necessarily guarantee that there's been no wind. And with this one, it's going to be the same issue. There is one other problem that we've got with this snow is that if you're talking about areas of the GTA, or you're talking about almost anywhere, depending on how cold it is, will depend on how fluffy the snow is. Now, again, that's a fairly simple look at this, but a little bit colder, you just tend to get a bit more fluffy snow. So when you have heavy, wet snow, it compacts a bit more, so it may look like we're getting a bit less snow, and that's sort of what we're looking for on this one. But if we do get that cold air coming in a little later, we may get just that little bit fluffier snow, so it may seem like we're getting more or that we're overachieving. But what we do when we're measuring the snow, or when we eventually measure it, is we measure it as liquid equivalent. So we melt the snow and figure out how many millimeters of water we have, and that usually gives us a pretty good idea of whether or not you've seen over what we originally thought or under what we originally thought.
It'll be very interesting to see. Actually, I want to push it to parts of southwestern Ontario to take a look at the timing. And you alluded to the fact of like a little bit more mixing will result in more compact snow. Areas like Windsor and Sarnia, you're seeing a lot of mixing right through this evening before that transition over to snow. So just to quickly explain this graphic, it's quite self-explanatory, but for the next 12 hours, what you're seeing in the pink boxes, hour by hour, indicates more of a rain-snow mix, a little bit of mixing. The blues obviously indicate snow. So Sarnia, you're seeing that heavy snow push in between 6 to 9 p.m. In London, it looks like mixing is not so much of an issue, but of course that can pop up at times. And then we stretch our way across the GTA, Toronto, Ottawa, even getting into it a lot later. Melinda, you timed out the Ottawa for us. The snowfall doesn't arrive a little bit later until closer to that midnight hour. But Toronto, I mean, you're into the heavy snow right around that rush hour commute. So again, this is what's making it so impactful.
And you know, that is going to be due to those strong gusty winds, especially right up along the lake shores where we've seen those strong winds gusting upwards to 80 kilometers per hour. We could potentially overachieve and get some stronger winds as well, depending on exactly the direction of the winds. And those easterlies coming off of Lake Ontario, those are going to be packing quite a punch. So it's going to be bringing in blizzard-like conditions, especially many areas across the GTA and around the Golden Horseshoe as well. Areas outside the GTA, not too much of a wind factor, but we'll still be looking at some more accumulations as well.
Next question, I'm in Brampton. How much are we getting here? Melinda, I know we were chatting about this off air because we were kind of looking at who's in the hardest hit areas. And you know what? It looks like Brampton is in one of those sweet spots, if you will, of seeing straight snow and seeing some of the heaviest snow and the highest snowfall rate. So if you are in the Brampton area, I know it's a large city, but overall we are forecasting between 20 to 30 centimeters. Again, that's a range. It's a wide range, but it does give us room to be a little bit more flexible on whether or not something changes or not in your forecast. But again, 20, 30 centimeters, it's a big snowstorm.
It is, especially when we are forecasting for this, Jesse. We talked about the 407, and usually during these snowstorms, even Mark can comment on this too, we tend to see a bit more heavier snowfall rates and more accumulations for areas north of the 407. It's a little bit higher in elevation, not too much of a gradient, but we still see or tend to see a bit more heavier snowfall compared to areas like downtown Toronto, and for areas like in Brampton, we can still see a bit more of that range in terms of accumulations.
Yeah, you know what? It's definitely, I found ever since I moved from downtown Toronto to Guelph, I just get more weather out here, just in general, and a lot of that has to do with with being on top of the escarpment. It just cools things down just that little bit, and you just get more snow. I've driven quite a few times from the top of the escarpment near Campbellville down to Milton, and they've quite literally changed from snow to rain. It's that quick. One thing I do just before I go, the Burlington Skyway. Do not be surprised if that one's closed, especially as we get a little later on into the evening. I wouldn't be surprised if they close that down, especially if we start to get those very strong winds combined with the snow. So keep that in mind if you are traveling anywhere near there.
The very strong winds are going to be something to be concerned about. Power outages, I think we hit on all the questions that we could for this live stream. We're just going to walk everyone through the latest forecast update because we all want to know the nitty-gritty details out of this one. I mean, it's a wide-reaching system, this Texas low. We've had multiple systems. It's been quite the active start to March. I know we're only 3 days in, but I mean, parts of Eastern Canada have already seen some of their quote-unquote biggest snowfall so far. So, I mean, Melinda, let's walk everyone through this for the final time. Even though conditions are not that bad right now, they're quite mild, kind of quiet, not really reporting any snow yet. That's going to quickly change, right?
Yeah, so we're going to start to see that snow push in towards the later half of the afternoon. So around, 3, 4, we'll start to see that rainfall, in fact, pushing across southwestern Ontario. areas like London, Stratford, we'll be looking at colder air filtering in, Jesse. So that means we are seeing more of that snowfall and then pushing in across the GTA. Once again, the heaviest snowfall rates and the strongest winds are going to be occurring after 6 p.m. until around midnight. So we are going to be looking at quite a bit of accumulation, potentially exceeding over 5 centimeters an hour in some localities. And then for the Ottawa area, Eastern Ontario, that'll be more after midnight and then continuing throughout the day Saturday, but not as much as the snowfall we're going to be seeing across major areas across the GTA. In fact, we'll be looking at potentially 20 to 30 on the high end, but areas across Eastern Ontario, upwards to Cottage Country and through Quebec, we'll be looking at roughly 5 to 15 centimeters.
And Mark, let's discuss your plans for tonight. It's a big night. Are you bringing little Hobbs with you?
Well, yeah, she was just bugging me to jump up here. But yeah, I'm going to say right now, I'm going to bring up Hobbs as an example. If you have to walk your dogs, do it now. You're going to want to make sure that you're in before everything happens. So I'm going to take Hobbs out and take her for a walk right now as soon as we're done here. But I will be out and about, probably not even that far from where I am now, maybe down Highway 6 towards Clapperton Corners and Hamilton, just to show and document how bad the storm is going to be in and around the area. But again, as I say, don't do what Mark does. I'm just out there to show you what's going on so that you can stay inside and watch me stand out in the blowing snow and cold winds.
Okay. Luckily, it won't be bitter cold. I know you've been in colder weather than this one, but this will be an epic snowfall. Stay safe, Mark. Thank you for joining us. And of course, Melinda, thank you for answering all these questions. Thank you to all of our viewers sending in your questions. We'll be tracking this all day here on the Weather Network, so stay with us.